And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style once again, and in partnership with the Washington Examiner, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Once again, here on the show. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also on Twitter, follow me at Sang Center. That's saying with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You see it right on the screen there. And on Facebook, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro is the place to go for the Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality Facebook page, plus JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com, the place to go for the shop, all our great content, and so much more, JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. Plus, be sure to check out our friends at the Washington Examiner, like, subscribe, follow all those good things on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, at WashingtonExaminer.com. Speaking of the Examiner, it is Washington Examiner Wednesday, and in the next segment, we'll be joined by Cassidy Morrison to talk about some healthcare stories going on related to COVID-19 and this ongoing virus that our nation is faced with. She is a healthcare reporter at the Washington Examiner. Some interesting stories about plasma and the possible usage of plasma in helping to treat COVID-19 patients, and so much more. You do not want to miss that. It's going to be very interesting coming up a little after the bottom of the hour today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But first, the stock market has been in a topsy-turvy dynamic for months now. It's just absolutely fascinating to see what's been happening in the markets and with different companies, especially as the economy has been struggling to get by, to recover. We're seeing some stops and some starts in different areas. We've got some fascinating news about Kodak being brought in to help produce pharmaceuticals in America with a federal government contract, which seems to be a little out of the ordinary for Kodak. The SEC is looking into this, Securities and Exchange Commission. Meanwhile, you have mergers and acquisitions that are ongoing. So many different things to talk about. And that's why I am pleased to do so with Crista Huff, who rejoins us on the program. She is founder and equity portfolio manager at the hedge fund Freedom Investment Partners, LP. And Crista joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Crista, welcome to the show. First time with the full title.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, I'm so happy to finally be there,
Well, congratulations. I know you've been working years on turning this dream into reality, and you're already rocking and rolling, as we will talk about in a little bit. But I want to start with the broad question, then we're going to narrow in on some specific stories. I'm just wondering where you're seeing the stock market and the economy at around right now, because last time we had you on several weeks ago, you were the bearish I could ever recall Crista Huff being in years of interviewing you.
I have been extremely bearish on the economy, and I don't know if I spoke to you after the March market drop, but I had anticipated the drop. I bought low with my new fund. My new fund then performed really well since I did buy low, and one of my one account that I manage is up over 50% from the March lows. So despite me being bearish about the economy, the stock market is its own animal, and I have to take my cues from the market as to what's going to happen next. So basically, we've been seeing the stock market roaring back up toward the highs from earlier this year, and the NASDAQ actually is much higher than previous highs. So the market's bullish.
Yeah, what's an important point that you raised is that there's a difference, there's a separation between how the economy is doing and how the market's doing. A lot of people look at the stock market and say, oh, it's up or it's down. That must mean that the economy is struggling, which is far from the case.
Right. The two of them don't move in sync, which is probably one of the reasons that people make perhaps bad investment decisions, because they're expecting if they like the president, the market should go up, or if unemployment is terrible, then the market should go down, et cetera. And no, they're not necessarily in sync, but there are specific sectors or industries that are very, very much affected by the economy. So, for example, I have a bearish bet on airlines, because for many reasons regarding both the lockdown and people's fear of going back in public in the ensuing months, I expect the airline industry to suffer greatly. So that's one of the few bearish positions I have in my portfolio right now.
So let's talk about a few different stories that have been notable in terms of the news of late. Kodak, this is interesting. There's a massive government contract of, I think, nearly $800 million. The federal government bringing in Kodak to manufacture some prescription drugs in order to help address, the COVID-19 crisis that we're facing right now with the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. But now the Securities and Exchange Commission has apparently taken a little bit of an interest in this deal, perhaps because it seems unusual. I mean, I don't think of Kodak as being in pharmaceuticals and dealing with drugs and so forth. What have you seen about this story?
Okay, so the government loaned $765 million to Kodak so that Kodak could produce pharmaceuticals. If Kodak is capable of producing those, then sure, get a loan, produce it, make money, and pay back the loan. To me, there's nothing unusual there. But of course, somebody somewhere, probably, a political opponent in Washington, D.C., raised a red flag and said, hey, is this legitimate? So the Securities and Exchange Commission steps in to examine it to make sure it's legitimate. And frankly, Kodak's been around forever. All the folks who are running the company have their jobs on the line if they do anything scurrilous. So I'm sure that they had all their I's dotted and their T's crossed. So the Securities Exchange Commission will examine to make sure the loan was above board. Kodak will proceed to produce pharmaceuticals as they have, essentially promised in whatever contract they made with the government. And then the next issue that happened was somebody said, well, hey, the executive chairman got stock options recently. That can't be legitimate either. Well, why can't it be legitimate? The guy has been there for about 7 years. He received stock options and stock as part of his compensation. He has literally never sold a share. Not only has he not sold a share, but he has spent more of his own money. He spent every dime that he earned as executive chairman, plus more of his own money to buy Kodak shares because he believes in the company. So all of that sounds normal. If you or I had money to invest, we would buy shares of companies we believed in. So I know that the media tries to spin all this like it's real negative, but I don't see anything here where somebody broke any laws. Certainly there hasn't been any information to that effect.
Yeah, though it is interesting when you see how the stock market reacts how stock investors rather react to news like this kind of a deal, because the stock price did shoot up and then it noticeably declined afterwards. I mean, I know that Kodak isn't the kind of investment that you would necessarily make given your particular style, but any thoughts on the company?
The company's been suffering. They took a small loss in 2018, then they took a large loss in 2019. We know that, practically decades ago, their photography business crashed and burned. So I don't even know how they've been staying alive in recent years. I'm sure they're producing something, but this is a big opportunity for them to, restart the company, hire more people in Rochester, New York. So it's pretty cool for Kodak that they got this government loan. The share price had been tooling along below $3 a share. And then last Wednesday, it went as high as $60 a share. And that's just investors, actually gamblers, because, investors don't buy stocks that went up 1,000% in one day, but gamblers do. So basically, gamblers drove the share price up from $2 to $60 in one day, and right now it's trading around 15.
Once again, Crista Huff is our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. She's portfolio manager at Freedom Investment Partners and for a long time has been a stock market analyst on various programs that I have hosted. So, Crista, let's talk about Marathon Petroleum. This is a company you are very familiar with, and they've made some interesting moves that have even brought in my favorite place to go to get coffee on a regular basis, Dunkin' Donuts. Tell us what's going on there.
Okay, quick backstory. Last year, activist investor Paul Singer from Elliott Management got involved in talking to the board of directors and saying, hey, you need to change your business strategy because this company could be worth so much more. So the first thing Paul Singer did was he said, you need to fire the CEO. So Marathon fired the CEO. I was pretty shocked. But from what I hear inside the industry, the CEO was like an old business kind of guy and not a guy who was really going to examine the business and make it more valuable. So one of the longer term things that Paul Singer wanted them to do was to remove the Speedway retail stores, the gas stations, from Marathon, either spin it off or sell it. So it's been in the works for a year now. I've been following it closely. And finally, 7-Eleven's parent company, which is a Japanese company, they announced that they're going to spend $21 billion purchasing all of the Speedway stores. So last Thursday afternoon, Dunkin' Donuts reported earnings, and they mentioned that they are closing all their stores that are in the Speedway stores. So there were 450 Dunkin' Donuts within Speedway locations, and they were going to close all of them. And so right away I said, uh-oh, Marathon's about to sell Speedway. Marathon, I'm thinking, probably went to Dunkin' Donuts and said, look, we'll pay you this money to close all those stores because the new buyer doesn't want the Dunkin' Donuts stores in the Speedway locations. So I think I was messaging people about that on social media on Saturday, and then lo and behold, on Sunday, the announcement came that the 7-Eleven parent company is buying the Speedway stores without the Dunkin' Donuts.
That is something I've got here from the Keurig, Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I couldn't resist not taking a sip since we're talking about Dunkin' Donuts. I'm sorry, repeat what you just said.
Yeah. Let's talk about our favorite flavor. I like the vanilla cream donut because I'm really big on icing. I love icing. And the vanilla cream not only has the white icing inside, but it has a big blob of white icing on the outside.
So in terms of donuts, favorite donut, I don't know. I mean, there are just so many. The chocolate cream has been really striking me lately. I've always loved the Boston cream. That's a classic Jimmy Sengenberger donut choice, to be sure. But one thing that was so striking, going back to the stock, and the Marathon Petroleum situation, is I saw the news about 350 Speedway stores, and then or 450 Speedway stores, and then the rest that are from some other locations. About 8% of all of Dunkin' Donuts stores will be closing down. Those other ones are underperforming stores that are closing down. But as far as the Speedway, I was scratching my head and I was wondering what's going on here. And then when I saw you post about Marathon Petroleum in this maneuver, I commented on your thread. I said, could this explain why Dunkin' Donuts and Speedway are parting ways here? And it appears pretty darn clearly that that is the case, given the 7-Eleven connection in particular, where the parent company, the Japanese parent company of 7-Eleven, which who knew that they were owned by a Japanese company, they're buying up all the Speedway stores.
Right. And I want to add this. I've been invested in Marathon for many years. I traded. I've been in and out of it several times, even this summer, because it has a sort of steady trading range. It's got a dividend yield over 6%. So I definitely own Marathon shares and I own Marathon call options. But additionally, when I was researching everything in the past few days, I was reading Dunkin' Donuts earnings report and I was looking at their balance sheet numbers and I'm like, well, this looks pretty interesting, because if you read the earnings report from last Thursday, they hired some new executives to go in some new marketing directions. They're cutting some of the fat from those stores that were underperforming. The profit situation looks good. And so I decided, you know what, they don't entirely fit my typical investment profile, but I decided to take a small position in Dunkin' Donuts because also I think the price chart looked relatively attractive. So I'm planning to make some short-term money in Dunkin' Donuts, but Marathon, I have a more solid belief that it's extremely undervalued.
Yeah. So in terms of the stock market and what you're seeing as far as the dynamics that are in play right now, Crista Huff, again, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, what have you been noticing in terms of, say, companies that you're particularly following at Freedom Investment Partners, and how you've been performing and what you've seen in the market that has presented opportunities?
Okay, so the fund is performing well. I only started on February 10th, which was like 9 days before the market began to fall and then crash. So you might say, oh my gosh, what a horrible time to start investing. But in January and February, I had been on your show saying, you know what, the market's overdue to fall. So I had most of the money in cash, and then the market fell a tremendous amount. And then I started buying in mid-March. So my fund is, at the end of June, it was ahead of the S&P 500 by about 13 or 14 percentage points in terms of total performance. So the fund is doing well. My favorite industry right now that's undervalued but has not only a value opportunity and dividend opportunities, but also merger and acquisition opportunities, that would be the investment management, life insurance, and annuity stocks. Again, I've been talking about these all year. They crashed a huge amount in March, and I think that was because the last time we had a similar market crash, American International Group, also known as AIG, they were very famous in that crash, and they were a life insurance company. So I think a lot of investors said, oh no, we're having a market crash. The last time AIG was a big player, so let's get rid of our insurance stocks. Well, every time the market falls, it falls for a different reason, and insurance companies had nothing to do with the difficulty this time. So basically, you had all these incredibly attractive companies that were super cheap. So I just bought a lot of them. I still own 4 of them, and even today, a lot of them are up from excellent earnings reports.
Very interesting. Well, good luck. So far, so good. Crista Huff joining us again, Freedom Investment Partners, LP. And I want to do one more thing. So you'll recall the way when we would talk about earnings season on my old morning show in Denver, Business for Breakfast, how we would go ahead and do that. Because I want to ask you a quick question about earnings season, which is upon us. And in order to do that, let's do it old school. And here's the intro.
Okay.
Be very quiet. That wacky wabbit and screwball duck are nearby.
Duck season, wabbit season, duck season, wabbit season, duck season, wabbit season, duck season, wabbit season!
Oh, you have to help me, Mr. Federal Reserve Chairman. I don't know if it's duck season or wabbit season or tarantula season or what season it is, but it's definitely earnings season. Oh, you're deplorable.
So earnings season is upon us, I guess. It sounds sounds pretty wacky, but there you go. What should people look for in earnings season this go around?
Okay, what I always look for is first I go and look at the consensus earnings estimates for their current quarter. The estimates are all of Wall Street's predictions on what will happen, all averaged together into one number. So, for instance, I think Equitable, was it Equitable or Assurant? Okay, I had one that was supposed to report last night at $2.09 per share, and they came in at $2.76 per share. So you want to look at the consensus estimate versus the actual number on the earnings report. Don't even bother looking for news stories, just go straight to the press release at any company's investors relations site. Then you get the black and white numbers without any spin at all. And that's how you're going to know how your company is performing. And then if the company, you read more in the press release, if the company gives guidance towards how the next quarter is supposed to look, compare those numbers to the current consensus estimates. And if those numbers are higher, then your stock is probably going to be going up. So it's a good way to also figure out, should I buy the stock or not? Just read the earnings report and make a decision.
Thank you, Crista Huff. I do appreciate it, except for the fact that now I am craving a Dunkin' Donut. My gosh.
Donuts.
Maybe I've had too many. In the past week with my birthday and everything, I have just had too many. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate you breaking things
Jimmy.
down. Thank you.
Perfect.
Once again, Crista Huff joining us, founder and equity portfolio manager at Freedom Investment Partners LP, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And it is, as always, such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here on the program, particularly because we get to jump into all sorts of different topics. I mean, we're talking a little bit about what's happening in terms of the stock market there with Crista Huff. There's a lot of intrigue, a lot of fascinating stories, a lot of things that have been going on of late in the stock market that can get a little bit confusing, given everything that's happening with the economy. And then, as she was pointing out, the economy and the stock market are not one and the same. They are two different animals. And when we look at that and we think about the fact that a lot of people look at the stock market and they see ebb and flow. Oh, is that an indicator of the economy? The stock market's bullish, so the economy must be great. The stock market's very on the negative side, very much on the negative side. So the stock market must be indicating to us that the economy is just not where it needs to be. They could be true, could potentially not be true. What we're seeing right now is a fairly bullish stock market, relatively so it seems, despite the fact that the economy has been on very shaky ground. So we'll see what happens, to be sure, but it is fascinating, as always, to observe the stock market and to break it down with somebody like our friend Crista Huff, now the portfolio manager at Freedom Investment Partners, LP. It looks like we've had one of those rare instances nowadays where our software program freezes up. So we're going to take a quick break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We'll be right back with Cassidy Morrison of the Washington Examiner for Washington Examiner Wednesday. Don't go anywhere.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I have a very important issue that I'd like to discuss with you, the people of America, and the people of the United States as well. Traffic circles, traffic circles. These things are very communistic. Older people are terrified of traffic circles. I noticed this about 20 years ago when they came in. I said, this is no good. Our forefathers didn't fight in World War II to have traffic circles. They're very scary. It's, oh, let's all join hands and come into the circle like hippies. Wrong. You come to a four-way stop like a man and you take your territory if you can handle it. If you can't, you get spit to the side and you're out. You lose. You're a loser. And that's what I wanted to make very clear at this time. Thank you very much for your attention. That's all. Going.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Folks, let's get you back to your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Indeed, welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you. Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, working the Matouche magic through the thankfully they've become rare technical issues here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, bringing engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, and doing our level best, of course, to make sense out of nonsense. Please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Follow me on Twitter at Sang Center, Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And of course on Facebook, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. And in addition, don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, all those good things for our partners at the Washington Examiner on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. And it is Wednesday, August 5th. And because it's Wednesday, that means it's Washington Examiner Wednesday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, where we like to talk with somebody at the Examiner about the issues of the day because, let's face it, there's never a dull moment in America right now. There's not a slow news day to be found, especially when we're talking about healthcare news like what we're seeing with the coronavirus. That's why I am pleased today to be joined by Cassidy Morrison, who's a healthcare reporter at the Washington Examiner, to break down some of the latest healthcare-related news. And she joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Cassidy, welcome to the show.
Hey. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on. I appreciate you joining us on this Washington Examiner Wednesday. And gosh, you've been doing some great reporting on a few different aspects of the healthcare situation that we're seeing with coronavirus, COVID-19, particularly with regards to this thing called convalescent plasma. That's a little above my level of comprehension. I think you did a pretty good job boiling down what this kind of therapy for COVID-19 could be. What have you learned?
Yeah, so convalescent plasma, it's an experimental treatment, experimental in the sense that it hasn't yet been clinically proven to treat the coronavirus, but it's been around for over a century. It's been used to treat various infectious diseases, 1918 Spanish flu, for instance. So it's a treatment in which doctors will take donated blood from someone who had the coronavirus, recovered, and separate the plasma from the blood, which is the liquid part, and transfuse it into a person who is currently being treated for the coronavirus. And the idea is to take the antibodies from the plasma in the recovered patient and transfuse it into the patient currently being treated as a way to give the second patient's immune system a boost.
So, Cassidy, when we look at this as an experimental treatment, I mean, what does that mean, experimental? Is this something that the government has said, hey, we think that this is something that is worthwhile, worth exploring? Or is it, hey, we think that this works, so go ahead and start using it as often as you possibly can? I mean, what are we being told here by the federal government, which has been a little more vocal on different sides of the issue when it comes, for example, to the hydroxychloroquine debate, which is one of the treatments that has been out there?
Yeah. So recently, Wednesday actually, Monday, President Trump said in his press briefing that we're starting to look more closely at convalescent plasma as a possible game changer. And he called on people to donate blood if they've recovered from COVID. And just recently, we heard from 4 former Food and Drug Administration commissioners saying essentially the same thing. This treatment could be a game changer if it were to be studied more in depth. And so far, we're hearing that a fair portion of the administration's Operation Warp Speed, which is a $13 billion initiative to fund research into vaccines, treatments, a portion of that will be put towards specifically possible treatments for coronavirus, convalescent plasma being one of them. And as of right now, in my reporting, I've heard mostly anecdotal evidence that it works. I spoke to a physician in Texas who said, yeah, this could make a big difference, but we've only seen limited studies showing that. So far this year, I believe there have only been a handful with pretty small sample sizes. So there is a push by the administration to put more time and resources into this.
Cassidy Morrison, again, our guest healthcare reporter at the Washington Examiner. So when it comes to the convalescent plasma therapy treatment, this seems to be an example of physicians hearing anecdotal stories of, hey, this seems to be working, this has real potential, so why not give it a go if your patient, for example, would fit a risk profile where it's not something that they would be adverse to. Because obviously every doctor is going to look at the patient and say, okay, this probably doesn't fit your profile, it's a little too risky, it's not the kind of treatment that would be best for you, let's look at something else. But if it does fit for the profile for that particular patient, it seems that they're looking at what others are saying and using this, because right now we're still in nobody has something concrete that is demonstrable 100% of the time, proven treatment, especially at different phases. For example, we've talked on this program about hydroxychloroquine with a couple others can work in the first few days very effectively of treatment, but once you get later on, it seems not to work quite as much. So a lot of doctors are looking and saying, okay, this seems promising, that seems promising, let's go ahead and use this for you, as opposed to this is concrete, we've got the proof, and the federal government says this is the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. It is very much around anecdotal evidence, and to some extent it's, kind of throwing noodles at the wall to see if they stick.
Yes, trial and error a little bit.
Exactly. So there are a few instances in which doctors can, look at a patient and decide, okay, you would probably be best suited for a course of treatment by remdesivir, which is a treatment from Gilead Sciences. It's being fast-tracked now and ordered up by tons of hospitals to try and use because, again, it's something that is promising that doctors are willing to try. And convalescent plasma is no different. At the time, we only have very limited studies right now showing that it could treat coronavirus. But, to some extent, it's gotten to the point in this pandemic where doctors, medical professionals, nurses, and even public health officials in the federal government, Dr. Anthony Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx, they've implored doctors and researchers to kind of look at this holistically and be willing to look into just about anything because this pandemic is still persisting.
Yeah, Cassidy, one thing for me that really hits at this is that you're talking about a situation where doctors are doing the best that they can given the tools available. And there's a big discussion about patient freedom options that doctors and patients can choose from and not restricting it, especially as we're talking about, these different treatments. Hydroxychloroquine is one that has spurred a lot of controversy, but you've got remdesivir, as you're pointing out. You've got the convalescent plasma therapy. So doctors are really looking for different opportunities to treat their patients. And I think that this goes to the heart of one of the big discussions about giving physicians the latitude to make those decisions, because it's not the first time that we've had a virus or some other disease that people have been faced with where doctors have said, okay, we have no clear-cut solution, but we're going to take some chances with some different opportunities that are presenting themselves. And I just think it goes to the core of a very important debate we're having in America right now over doctor-patient privilege and doctor-patient choice and decision-making.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it very much is up to the doctor and in consultation with the patient. And, like you said early on, hydroxychloroquine was encouraging in that, patients who took it early enough, and this was, I think before various studies came out that showed it really doesn't make much of a difference in treatment, in recovery time. But it very much was a decision between the doctor and the patient. This is what I think is best for you. And the federal government, I think the Trump administration is really taking that issue to heart, not pushing a specific treatment, even though President Trump did tout the benefits of hydroxychloroquine for quite a while. They're not pushing doctors to stick to one specific idea. Remdesivir is right now the most promising, but it by no means is the only option doctors have. And I think the only issue right now that the administration is really pushing is this vaccine development, which is good because as of right now, about 6 vaccines are entering final stage clinical trials. And there is some optimism in the administration that one could become as prepared as early as, the end of the year, early 2021. So You're right. It is very much up to the doctor and the patient. But, at this point, it's kind of just trying whatever they think works.
Yeah. Well, and I will quibble just a little bit in terms of the hydroxychloroquine, because we were talking about a paper or an article published in Newsweek a couple weeks ago by a professor of public health at Yale School of Health. He is an epidemiologist who's been published like 300 times. He's reviewed numerous papers. He's one example of several high-level physicians who were saying in the first several days, if you catch it early, hydroxychloroquine mixed with zinc, azithromycin, whatever the combination is, can be effective early on. But when you're getting later on, that's when remdesivir can kick in. Of course, we're talking about these convalescent plasma therapy treatments and different possibilities, especially once you get into the hospital setting when things become even more tense. And so one of the things that we're hearing is that if you're looking at hydroxychloroquine, the only thing that really, the time when that could really be beneficial is preventing hospitalizations. Once you get in the hospital, it's a different animal. And that's especially when the tensions kick in, because you're trying to, at that point, make sure that things do not get too serious and that the life of the patient is assured moving forward. Again, Cassidy Morrison is our guest from the Washington Examiner. I'm curious about the vaccine issue, because I've been very skeptical about the prospect of getting a vaccine by the end of the year, but one of the articles that you have published in the Examiner, Cassidy, talks about the possible political implications of the vaccine actually coming to fruition and being put out, say, in October, an October surprise of a vaccine, and whether or not that could actually help President Trump in his race for reelection. What are folks saying about that?
Well, it very much is, a miracle best case scenario. I don't think vaccine candidates right now are on track to come out prior to the November election. I was, just trying to get a handle on whether or not this would give Trump this much needed boost in polling, especially in his approval ratings for his response to the pandemic. And what I heard from several people, Bipartisan Policy Center, Heritage Foundation, organizations that are, both more liberal and more conservative. And I heard kind of the same thing over and over. And it's having a vaccine before the November election really wouldn't dig Trump out of this hole that the country is in economically. The damage is kind of done. And, another big issue here is vaccine hesitancy. We saw this a lot when measles broke out anew last year, and anti-vaxxers, for lack of a better term, on social media became very, publicized, and a lot of people are really hesitant to get a vaccine that was, researched and developed in less than a year. It remains to be seen whether people will be flocking to get this vaccine once it's ready, even if it's, fully vetted by the Food and Drug Administration. And it, unfortunately, not a lot of people might be comfortable with getting it if it were to be ready by the end of 2020, early 2021, which, from my reporting seems feasible. But as far as Trump's polling and approval ratings, having a vaccine that early wouldn't bail him out of the issues that we are dealing with now that were due in part to the administration's response to this pandemic early on.
Yeah, surely it is an example of one thing that could, along with a bunch of other things, a bunch of other factors, maybe help President Trump in his reelection. But the vaccine issue alone, especially when going to your point about reticence among people, Americans, as to whether or not they'll take the vaccine. There's a new poll that came out yesterday from Yahoo News and YouGov saying that the number of Americans who plan to get vaccinated if it comes out, say this year, falls to 42%, a new low. And I think that goes to one of the issues that we've been struggling with across this country, Cassidy Morrison, and that is people's faith in our institutions, including the scientific establishment and politicians, and whether or not they feel comfortable taking a step like this.
Right. And we've seen a lot of that in within this pandemic alone. People have been worried that maybe our health institutions, the FDA specifically, are too driven by politics to be giving an unbiased reporting of what might work, what not, what will not work, and steps that they're taking to try and turn this around. I mean, we saw it with hydroxychloroquine, which only recently was taken off the FDA's list of emergency approved treatments for the coronavirus. And you're right, there is pretty widespread apprehension to trust public health. And to some extent, I think that's merited. The public health system across the country has been underfunded for years. And, this probably wouldn't have been anticipated much far in advance. I mean, people are hesitant to believe everything that the government tells them, what is a viable treatment, what's a viable vaccine. And it's merited because, the public has been led astray a few times when it comes to
changing information.
Right, exactly.
Well, one thing as well that strikes me is that my research has shown that the quickest vaccine that we got was for mumps, and it took 4 years. So it's pretty striking. If we actually do get a vaccine this year, that's like less than a quarter of the time it took to get the fastest vaccine in the past, mumps, which could raise some of the skepticism where some Americans could say, okay, I want to see how this pans out for people who do take the vaccine first before I decide to take the plunge and jump into it myself.
Yeah, exactly. And again, those feelings of apprehension are completely warranted. I mean, most vaccines take about 10 years to develop, and mumps really was an exception. And I know even some healthcare professionals who feel a little uneasy about a vaccine that has been developed in, 6 months to a year. And, it's understandable, I think, especially for those who typically aren't too likely to vaccinate for this same concern. And, I think it's going to be an issue that either the Trump administration or the Biden administration are going to have to deal with almost immediately if a vaccine were to come out, by the end of the year.
Yeah, it is something. And the politics of COVID-19, let's kind of wrap up here since you were talking about the vaccination politics and whether or not a vaccine coming out, say, in October would actually help to propel President Trump to reelection. And I agree with your reporting and the assessment of others that alone will not do it. You need a variety of factors to come into play positively for President Trump to ensure that victory. But Cassidy Morrison, what else are we noticing in terms of the politics politics of the COVID-19 debate, as we're seeing discussions in Washington, D.C. over, of course, an economic package, but also you've got the questions about treatments, and you've got the mask debate, and you've got President Trump versus Joe Biden and their different war of words at various times and so forth. So what do you make of the overall politics of the current coronavirus pandemic?
Right. So I think the most apparent issue is messaging, even in the Trump administration. I mean, President Trump has not issued a nationwide mask mandate, yet he is encouraging people to wear masks, rightfully so. And Dr. Anthony Fauci himself, Dr. Deborah Birx, both of whom are serving in the Trump administration right now, are telling people, please wear masks, please socially distance, whereas members in Trump's cabinet, President Trump himself is, saying we should absolutely reopen schools, fully operational in-person learning. And there is some kind of disconnect in the messaging between public health officials in the federal government and the president himself. And I think it's also worth noting, too, going back to this slim chance of a vaccine coming out before Election Day. This would be great for Trump, but as you rightfully pointed out, this is not the only thing that would, safeguard his position in the Oval Office. And an issue that President Biden or Vice President Biden could run on would be, yes, a vaccine is great and, good for him for launching Operation Warp Speed, but he would then be able to focus on, 157,000 people have died, and it's because of a slow response and, a lack of funding for public health. So there is a fair amount of available ammunition for each candidate to use. And, in the off chance that a vaccine does become available by November 1st, that would be great for Trump, but he would actually have to, between now and then, make some big moves to improve the economy, make some big moves to calm social unrest, and it's a big ask of him.
Yeah. Again, only one aspect of the whole picture, and there are a lot of different things in 2020. I mean, nobody can truly predict, I think, Cassidy, the direction that we will head come the November election, because there are all of these different dynamics. We've seen how quickly things can change. 2020 has been a year where the only thing is it's full of surprises, and it's full of chaos, and it's full of uncertainty. And that's the only thing you can be certain about.
I wouldn't want to repeat it.
Exactly. That's for darn sure. I think I saw a meme online recently that had two swings in stationary position, and it said, if 2020 were a swing. And I think that's very fitting. It's the same thing going throughout the year. Cassidy Morrison, healthcare reporter at the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for joining us here on Jimmy and the Crossroads on this Washington Examiner Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Once again, Cassidy Morrison joining us from the Examiner, and definitely good, solid reporting that you want to check out, because there are a lot of different dynamics that are at play here. But one thing that is crystal clear to me today is the fact that these treatments are available, and doctors need to have the latitude to make decisions without politics getting involved. Whether it is the hydroxychloroquine mix early on, whether it is remdesivir, particularly as a hospital treatment, or whether it is convalescent plasma therapy. No matter what, doctors should have the latitude and be encouraged to make decisions, not have politicians and public health officials making some kind of predetermined notion known about whether or not a particular treatment at this point in time is not effective or is effective unless it is crystal clear. That is not the case, as I've talked about in this program with hydroxychloroquine, that it does not work. It seems pretty clear that in a mix, azithromycin and zinc, that in the right dosage, it can, in those first 4 or 5 days, have a meaningfully positive impact, particularly in preventing hospitalizations. That seems pretty clear, and yet we've seen some public health officials and elected officials say, nope, we shouldn't allow people access. We shouldn't give them the wherewithal to use this particular treatment, particularly because of political reasons. On the same token, on the other side, President Trump and other politicians probably shouldn't have been just talking up early on hydroxychloroquine. Although if you do see some promise, I suppose it makes sense to say, hey, this is promising. We encourage physicians to look into it more, but allow doctors to make decisions, especially for treatments that have been around for some time. We have seen this kind of plasma therapy, I think, used in other circumstances. This is why they collect plasma in order to transfer that into other people. So it'll be fascinating to see how this all unfolds, but it is important that we enable and empower doctors to make decisions in consultation with their patients and in patients in consultation with their doctors without having politics interfere. That's critical. And that's the lesson more than anything about convalescent plasma therapy. What we're seeing right now in that debate, because it is another example of doctors looking and seeing promise here and making a decision based on anecdotal support to use this kind of therapy. We shouldn't get in the way of that. That is it for us today. I appreciate you being along for the ride on this Washington Examiner Wednesday. My thanks to Crista Huff with Freedom Investment Partners, to Cassidy Morrison, reporter at the Washington Examiner, to Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic, once again, as producer extraordinaire, to the Washington Examiner, our partners here on the show, especially on Washington Examiner Wednesday, and to you for watching, subscribing at youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, and sharing our programming. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. God bless America.